good?
I'm good.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3.
Welcome to the Insightful Journal. I'm very excited today to have Dr. Fred Burton discussing his book, How to Outlive Your Doctor Using Alternative Medicine. I'm telling you, that's quite a topic. So, we're going to learn all about how we're going to perform this feat. So, thank you, Dr. Burton, for being here. And tell me a little bit about yourself, how you got involved in alternative medicines and what's your background.
Well, thank you for having me, and I'll be glad to tell you the book actually is a result of people asking that question for the last 40 years. And I decided, since so many of them told me, you should write that story down, Doc, it's kind of unusual. I said, I'll do that. And after 25 years, I finally got it done. Thanks to COVID. COVID gave me the time because we had plenty of downtime. So I said, let me go ahead and finish this thing. Anyway, I grew up in South Philadelphia and went to the public school system. And when I was in high school, my father, whom I had much love and respect for, he pressed clothes for a living in Northeast Philadelphia, the cleaners. And he worked 5.5 days a week. He worked Saturday afternoons and came home on early Saturday afternoon. But this particular Saturday in October of '64, I was in starting 11th grade. My father came home and he was jaundiced. Uh, I recognized it because I'd seen it in my uncle who had alcoholic liver disease. And we rushed him down to Pennsylvania Hospital, and they told my mother that my father had pancreatic cancer. Now, I didn't realize how deadly that diagnosis was at the time, but we certainly heard cancer and expected things were going to be bad. But long story short, my father spent 9 months in the hospital, had two surgeries, two different hospitals, and that was the beginning of his long history of having medical problems because the diabetes. So interestingly enough, most people who receive a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer are usually dead within a year or so. My father actually lived for 18 years after the diagnosis, but those are 18 tumultuous years because he had diabetes after that, led to heart disease. He lost all of his teeth. He had multiple heart attacks, later developed prostate cancer, congestive heart failure. And, having watched him go through all that, I was really of the mindset that one day I'd end up just like him because he wasn't, you know, a outlandish guy. He kept his weight down. He didn't smoke. He didn't drink. He didn't hang out. And I just assumed that, hey, I was in trouble because my life wasn't as good as his. But after finishing high school, I went in the military because the Vietnam War was happening. And I joined the Air Force and intending to go into computer science, but they decided I need to be a medic, which was interesting because I had no previous interest in healthcare at all. But anyway, I took it because they worked indoors. I was interested in not working outdoors. So anyway, after 3.5 years of working in hospitals and rotating through various departments, helping to deliver babies and put on cash, drive ambulances, and do all that, I kind of satisfied my or what the layperson's curiosity about healthcare would be. I got to do all that. So when I got out of the military in 1971, I was kind of interested in doing something other than healthcare. I wasn't really interested. So I went to get a job, and of course, the only job I could find was working in a hospital because that was my only experience at that time. And I went along with it because it allowed me to catch up with my peers who had gone on to college while I was in the military. I got a chance to go to school during the day at community college and work in the evenings at the hospital. But a fortuitous event happened. In 1972, a year after I got out of the military, I ran into an old high school buddy who we were musicians in high school. He played trumpet, I played keyboard. We had a little combo. And while I was in the military, he was in college. And when I got out of the military, he was going to Jefferson Medical School. And we happened to run into each other each day because at that time, community college was right down the street from Jefferson Medical. And we decided that since we hadn't played our instruments in a while, we would get together and play. So we had Tuesday mornings free. We got together at my flat on the first Tuesday. It was in March of 1972. And we played for about 3 hours. We didn't even talk. We just played, had a good time. But the next Tuesday we got together, we didn't play. We talked. And he introduced me to the concept of alternative medicine. And that became my epiphany because no one had ever told me in all of my civilian or military health experience about alternative medicine. And that day gave me the first idea or inkling that I could avoid my father's many medical issues by changing my lifestyle and my diet. So he told me that day, he said, you should be a doctor. Now, I thought he was nuts because I thought being a doctor was for, guys who were straight A students and academic straight, in high school. And, like he was. He was that kind of guy. 4-year scholarship to Temple. So I said, I don't know about being a doctor, but I like this alternative medicine thing. Let me look into that. So I spent 2 years from 72 to 74 reviewing and researching alternative medical ideas. And after those 2 years, it finally dawned on me there was nothing else I could do but be a doctor because nothing else was more interesting to me to study on a graduate school level. So in 1974, I went down to Temple Medical School to talk to them about what it took to go to medical school. And they sent me to this organization called Recruitment, Admission, and Retention. And they introduced me to this woman named Faye Stevenson, who was a recruitment advisor. And after coming out of her office, it was like I had been a blind man. Somebody put brand new eyes in me with 20/20 vision, and I saw exactly what I was going to do, which is what I'm doing right now. Now, the interesting thing about that is, at that point, I was a junior at Temple, getting ready to finish my junior year, and I had never taken a college science course. So, of course, most of the people who were my friends and knew me said, Doc. They didn't call me Doc, they called me Fred. Said, Fred, you must be out of your mind. You've never taken organic chemistry, physics, biology. You haven't taken anything. How are you going to do this? Well, in 18 months, I had a letter of acceptance to med school. So it was quite a road, and I detailed that in the book.
That's an interesting story. There are parallels to it in terms of my experience as well. Because, I'm a native Philadelphia and I grew up in West Philly. And my father, he worked for a steel mill. And I was actually fortunate because I got involved with this program called AFNA. There was a man named Sam Evans who ran that program.
Sam Evans.
And so, he was the one that got me into medicine. I had no idea that I wanted to be a doctor. It's an interesting story.
Sam Evans was a giant, and he told me, he said, the best thing to do to your enemies is outlive them. And that's what he did.
That's right. So now tell me a little bit about your book, How to Outlive Your Doctor Using Alternative Medicine. Tell me about the basis for this book.
Okay, the basis is this. Once I got finished my basic medical training, which took me 10 years, from 1974 to 1984, my goal was to find individuals who had been practicing alternative therapies and seek advice and mentorship from them. And that's what I did. So I've been around the country, out of the country, the islands. I've been to various physicians' offices, conferences, and they mentored me, tutored me, and taught me their methods for identifying disease and showing people how to avoid, treat, and live pretty good, healthy lives using things that most doctors are not trained in medical school to understand. And it's been an exciting journey. I'm still on that journey. But I must say that I've learned quite a bit over the last 35, 36 years in practicing this type of therapy.
That sounds interesting, very interesting. So give me some little details. I want to know about some of these stories. They don't teach us any of this stuff in medical school. So I'm going to learn some stuff from you today.
Well, what I learned in medical school, which is interesting because, having had an experience in a civilian hospital and a military hospital, I knew the basics of medicine was to prescribe drugs and surgery. So when I got to medical school, I wasn't surprised that that's what we were going to learn. And of course, when you get into conversations with your peers, you talk about what your hopes and aspirations are for the future. And when people would say, well, I think I'm going into surgery, I'm going to OBGYN, I would say, well, I'm going to alternative medicine. And of course, the response would be, well, what's that? There's no money in that. And my response would be, well, there's health in it, though, because, I learned early on that money is a wonderful thing. Everybody needs it, and I like it too. But if you're not healthy, the money doesn't really make that big a difference. So I went and I met various people, and I'll tell you about some of them. One was a gentleman I met who was a Cherokee Indian medicine man in North Carolina. His name was Chief Two Trees. He was a former Air Force enlisted man, spent 20 years in the military, but upon retirement, he went back to the hills of North Carolina where he took up the profession of his forefathers, which was medicine people. And they taught him, and he got into the healing arts, and he had a place called the Native American Studies Institute. I found out about him by accident because a friend, it was kind of interesting how I met him. A friend called me on a Tuesday night in July of 1988 and said, hey, Fred, I got somebody I want you to meet. His name is Chief Two Trees. And I'm thinking, who the hell is Chief Two Trees? Anyway, he puts me on the phone with this guy, and this guy's telling me about all the problems he's seeing in his clinic that are routine problems I see every day, but he's saying most of them are just caused by parasites or worms. So I said, wait a minute, I learned about worms in medical school, but we were taught that was a third world problem. We were even taught that when you study for your board exams, don't even spend time wasting it on parasites because they're not going to ask you any questions. And in fact, when I took the flex exam in Memphis, Tennessee in 1981, there were 3 questions in 3 days of examinations on parasites. So I was kind of taken aback by this concept that parasites were causing so many problems. So I shared with him a problem I was having at the time, which is constipation. And he said to me, oh, you're just wormy. So I said, well, you know what? Nobody's ever said that to me. Where do you live? He said, Old Fort, North Carolina, 40 miles east of Asheville, which was just devastated by Hurricane Helena, I think it was. That was one of those hurricanes. Anyway, I said, I'm coming to see you. So the next month, the weekend before Labor Day weekend, I got my Z and I drove through a hurricane to North Carolina. And I spent 3 days on the top of a mountain with this guy, the Native American Studies Institute. And everybody who came to him, he was giving us something for parasites. And I asked the folks, I said, how does this thing with the parasites work for you? They said, hey, I never felt better. I was fine. I was not feeling good till I got here, and he made me fine. I said, okay. So I said to the chief, I said, why do you give everybody something for parasites? He said, it was because they all got them. I said, well, why do you say they all got them? He said, because this is their planet. We're visiting. He said, Fred, this is the wisdom of our fathers that we forgot we started relying on white man's medicine. I said, okay. So I went home and I did what the chief told me to do. And in a week, my constipation I had been suffering from for 15 years cleared up. But to my surprise, also my allergies to dogs and cats, which I had for 15 years, cleared up also. Then I thought back, when did all this start? I went to Africa in 1973, spent 33 days in Ghana, came back allergic to dogs and cats and constipated. And until 15 years later, when I met Chief Two Trees, I suffered from that. So I decided, well, you know what? My children, which were born, I met their mother after I got back from Ghana. They were then 13 and 8. I said, you guys got to do this. So my daughter was 13. She had horrible acne and anemia. And I'd seen anemia a lot, particularly in the public health centers. Matter of fact, when I was in residency, one of my preceptors, who was a hematologist, told me that the reason why so many black folks in D.C. had anemia is because black folks genetically had some sort of a difference in our hemoglobin count. I didn't know any better. He's an expert. I took him at his word. Well, my daughter had anemia. Hemoglobin, which should be at least 12, was running around 9.5. She was a good academician, but she was having problems staying awake in class. Right. My son, 8 years old, was having problems with ringworm and constipation. So I said, okay, guys, you got to do this stuff. So I worked out a deal, make them take for 2 weeks. They both totally cleared up. So I said, okay, let me call the chief. I called the chief. I said, Chief, I just wanted to thank you because everybody got better, man. He said, okay, Fred, now deworm your patients. They'll think you're God. So that was 1988. I can't tell you how many people I have dewormed since 1988 and how many things I have seen improve when I just do that. That's just one aspect of the things I've learned over the last 36 years that have made a big difference in many people's lives.
Dr. Burton, that's so interesting. I travel to Africa. I usually go to Africa once a year on a medical mission. And
Right,
the last place that I went, I was in Nigeria. I was like
right.
outside of Lagos in a small rural area. And I saw worms. And I said, well, what are
Yeah,
these? I said, I don't know anything about any worms. I said, I've never seen worms before. And I remember because I had to write the prescriptions, to treat people. So what I did
sure.
was I said, give the standard therapy for worms. That's what I wrote on the prescription form and gave it to the pharmacist. And the pharmacist knew exactly what to do. I didn't know anything
Exactly.
about it. That's an
Well,
interesting
it's
story.
interesting. Yeah, well, it's interesting. My youngest sister is in practicing OBGYN now in Nashville, Tennessee. She went to Meharry also. I was a senior and she was a freshman. I left and she stayed. She liked Nashville. But when she was an infant, my mother called my sister and I, my baby sister's 10 and a half years my junior. She called us up one night and told us to come down to see something. We came down and she was changing my younger sister's diaper and there were pinworms coming out of her. Now, that was the first time I ever saw parasites. So the concept wasn't so strange to me when the chief laid it out on me. But I tell you what, if I don't do anything but teach people how to regularly treat themselves for parasites, and not just one time now, like the chief said, this is their planet. We're visiting. In fact, a couple of years ago, I heard a 60 Minutes report where they talked about the gold mines of South Africa. And I don't know if you know this or not, but the deepest mines in the world are in South Africa, some of them going up to 3.5 miles down. So some scientists wanted to find out, well, is there life down there? So they went down and they looked and they found worms. I heard a interviewer talk to a oceanographer who had been to the bottom of every ocean in the world. And he asked the oceanographer, what is the most interesting thing you saw at the bottom of the ocean? And he said, worms. I thought back to the chief. This is their planet we're visiting.
That's an interesting story. Thank you so much for that. And there's certainly something to that because in the case of the patients that I saw in Africa, I mean, you could actually see the worms in their stool. When you looked at stool,
Exactly.
you see the worms in there. So
Exactly.
you knew they had worms. I didn't know how to treat them, but I knew they had the worms, which I had never seen that before. And I think that we do something called the ova and parasite test that I used to
Exactly.
remember we would do, when I was a resident, So that's very
Yeah.
interesting. I think that Western medicine, particularly here, that's something that we don't even consider in the differential
Exactly.
diagnosis. You're absolutely
Yeah.
correct about that.
Yeah. We're taught it's a third world problem. And as long as you don't go overseas, you don't have to worry about anything. But
Yeah,
I'll
so
say
so
this
so,
to you.
so tell me a little bit about some of the other things that you find
Oh, okay.
one of the things too is there was a doctor that I happened to run across who is very famous, Dr. Sebi. Have you ever read any of his materials or none of any of his therapies?
I met Dr. Sebi in 1982 in Washington, D.C. when I was an intern at Howard. And it's interesting. I tell people I get more questions about Sebi now that he's dead than I did while he was alive. And Sebi was an interesting fellow. I'd say about Sebi, I say Sebi is like a broken clock. He was right twice a day, but he had a lot of problems with some of his concepts. Plus, his formal education only went to the third grade, which he was kind of proud of, which I thought was interesting. But he was an herbalist who was originally based in Honduras, and he had some interesting concepts about some things that you can do with herbs. But one of the things I never heard him talk about was parasites. He never talked about parasites. And some of the other things that I found, you'll find this interesting. Most of the people that I see now, particularly females, have discernible hormone imbalances. And most medical doctors are not really taught
Yes.
about hormone imbalances. We refer anything we think is a hormone imbalance to an endocrinologist
Yes.
who are woefully undertrained. And what I found is that I learned from a chiropractor out of Houston named Stuart White. He had a 2-day conference in Harrisburg many years ago, and I attended the conference. And during one of the breaks, I went up to him and I said, Stu, you are treating the same kind of patients I'm treating, but you can't use drugs. So that's why I spend a lot of time hanging out with chiropractors and naturopaths. I said, how do you help those folks out? And he told me something very interesting, and it turned out to be an integral part of my practice now. He said, I feed
This
their
thing keeps falling
glands.
out of my ear.
So he taught me how to give human beings glands from a animal, raw glands, to feed the glands in our bodies. And instead of giving hormones, which sometimes is necessary, but most often feeding the glands from another animal becomes very effective in getting their glands to produce hormones the way they're supposed to. And it helps to mitigate those imbalances. In fact, I'll tell you something that I've come to understand in observing closely this COVID crisis we just went through. A lot of people died, as you know, and we attribute that death to either pre-existing illnesses or something of the sort. Well, that's true. They did have a pre-existing illness. That pre-existing illness was low thyroid, because I'm sure you've heard the term boosting my immune system. I got to boost my immune system. Well, in fact, the key to your immune system is your thyroid gland. And if your thyroid gland isn't producing enough thyroid hormone, then your cells won't have enough energy, because the thyroid hormone controls how your cells burn sugars and fat so that the cell gets the energy to do its job. And if the immune cells don't get enough energy, they don't protect you. And the way to know that easily is to know if a person's got pneumonia or not. Now, most of the people who died of COVID pneumonia.
Yes.
Well, if you read the book by Broder Barnes, which is another item that I talk about in my book extensively, I got Broder Barnes's book in 1984 in Washington, D.C. at an Alternative Health Expo. A man named Norman Fritz insisted that I buy the book when he saw my name tag and saw I was a medical doctor. He said, this book will change your life. Well, it took me 4 years to read that book, but in fact, when I did read it, it changed my life. Because what I found is that most people in this society are suffering from some degree of low thyroid. And that's why so many chronically ill people never get better, because the doctors never address their thyroid function. And what I found is that the people who are actually dying of COVID, which are dying of pneumonia, were dying because they got low thyroid.
That's very interesting. Dr. Burton, can you tell people about where they can get your book and show them? Because I think that everyone should be getting some copy of this to get this information. This is some really breaking information. So tell us a little bit about your book and how people can find it. Is there a website or a place where people can go to for more information?
Well, the book is now on Amazon, and it's also available through my office. And the phone number in my office, you can just call and tell them you want a copy. Hardback is selling for $45. Paperback is selling for $35. $35 for paper, $45 for hard. This is a copy of the hardback I'm having right here for you. And I'm pleased with the way the book turned out. People are telling me they love to read. I have patients who bought the book and they come back. I say, are you reading the book? I say, Doc, not only have I read the book, I got questions. And they got lists of questions. So one of my patients who I have from Bogota, Colombia, she, Miss Sanit, she's been here twice from Colombia to see me. And she said to me, Doc, I like the book because it's like talking to you. And I like talking to you. So I'm pleased with how the book turned out. People are getting a lot of information from it. But as
That's
far as
very
getting in the book in my
interesting.
office, you just call my office, 610-649-4325. 610-649-4325, and just ask for a book, and they'll give you a book.
Okay, and you said you can get it on Amazon too, because
You
I've
can
used
get it on
Amazon. So
Amazon
just
also.
go
Yeah,
to
you can get it on
Amazon and
Amazon
go
also.
to the book section and type in your name and
Yes,
the title, and it'll come right up.
it
Is it in
comes right up.
electronic form as well? Do you have it like on
Not as
Kindle?
yet. No, I don't have it on yet. We haven't gotten to that point yet. And I'm wondering how I can do that, because I have a lot of pictures. It's very interesting. how I work around that because the pictures are very important. I think they're significant to the book, especially in the section where I talk about cancer, what cancer is, and how to prevent it.
Hmm. Yeah, because
Yeah.
we're older doctors, so the kids now they're not reading the paper books anymore.
Oh
All
yeah.
of them are
Oh
all
yeah.
on their tablets and all of that, the electronics. And they do, I know, have a section, and it comes up just like the real book. There's like even a reader that you can get, and it's got the pictures and the graphs and everything. But not only that, but it has links. So you can press on the link and then it'll take you to another site that has additional information to support what you're talking about. So it's a really interactive experience. That's the way to
Well,
go. We'll talk about that, but we're going to get
yeah, I have to
more
do that.
into what you're doing on this book because this all sounds like such wonderful information that people need to know about. As you know, my background is in preventive medicine. So I
Right.
did internal medicine training, but I also went to Johns Hopkins and did a residency in preventive medicine and got my master's in public health. So I
Right.
have a little different view than most doctors who don't know anything about public health or any of these issues. So it's always exciting to talk with someone who actually understands that there are other aspects to medicine than what we're just taught in medical schools. So I'm very excited to hear this
Absolutely.
information. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much for being here and sharing it with us. So now let's
Oh,
give some other information about how to outlive your doctor. I know that one of
okay.
the main parts of it is keeping yourself from getting disease. I mean, as a
Exactly.
medical doctor, we treat people that are sick, but we don't tell anybody how to be well or how to keep from getting disease. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. And one of the things I met a gentleman in 1986 who his name was Glenn Scudder, and he was a naturopath who had been run out of Jersey for practicing medicine without a license. So we got together in 1986, and I spent some time with him at his office and at his home. And one of the things that fascinated me about Glenn was his uncanny ability to interpret the lab work that we routinely look at in the hospitals and understand what's really going on with the patient, far beyond what I learned in medical school. And at first, I thought he was joking me, and then I started to see the results and talk to the patients who he had treated. And this is a guy who couldn't use drugs. See, I always like hanging around people who couldn't use drugs in surgery. And I remember one day he had a lady come in who had gallstones, and I said, "Okay, he's gonna have to get surgery on this one. There's no way he's gonna get around this one." And 7 days later, she came in with a bag full of the stones that she had passed through her gallbladder. So now I'm stumped. And then how the hell you do this? And what he told me was he put her on a program called the liver gallbladder flush. And if you do that for a week, you'll go to the bathroom and pass all those stones. Now, I became quite interested in that because when I was a chief resident at Providence Hospital in 1984, uh, I had a lady who had 41-year-old black woman who had had gallbladder surgery and died of post-op complications. We coded her and she died. And I thought to myself, I got to one day figure out a way to avoid getting this gallbladder problem situation. And so when Glenn Scudder taught me that in 1987, I was good. So I haven't seen a person with gallbladder surgery since 1987.
That's interesting. Very interesting. Yes.
Yeah. Now, another thing, see, anything you make, stones, any stones can be eliminated if you put the person on the right program. So that's the thing about Glenn, though, that like I said earlier, he had this uncanny ability to read the blood work. I saw him take a basic metabolic panel, a CBC, a urinalysis, a sedimentation rate, and a C-reactive protein. And with that study, he was able to tell a person what was wrong with him, what was about to happen to him, and how not to get it. And he taught me that if you got a serious illness of any kind, the C-reactive protein and the sed rate will be elevated. One or both will be elevated. And I remember my mother coming to me in 1994 telling me she had a pain in her right breast. So I immediately did those tests, CBC with differential, uh, comprehensive metabolic panel, C-reactive protein, sed rate, urine. When the test came back, her sed rate, which for a female should be no higher than 20, was in the 80s. So I referred her to a surgeon near her home, Graduate Hospital in South Philadelphia. And I told him, I said, look, my mother got cancer, and I want you to get moving on this really quick. So he examined her and he called me back. He said, I don't think this is cancer. I said, look, I hope you're right, but my blood work says it's cancer. So get to work. So he did, and he called me back after the surgery. He said, look, not only is it cancer, it's the worst one, infiltrating ductal. And she was dead in 7 months. But the point is, Glenn Scudder taught me to see that. On the same token, I saw patients in the early 90s who were diagnosed with cancer who had normal sed rate and normal C-reactive proteins. I thought this had to be a mistake. I repeated the test, came back normal again. I said, lady, I don't know what's wrong with you exactly, but it ain't cancer. And it wasn't cancer. And this is a woman who already had a port put in. They were getting ready. She was diagnosed uterine cancer. They had already getting ready to give her chemo through a port. And I saw that woman 20 years later for an auto accident.
Isn't that interesting? These are some great stories. Yes. That's really, so, it really tells you many times, because I've had that similar experience with my family, that many times the diagnosis is one that's not appropriate. So I remember the case of my father, and I know that prostate cancer runs in our family, many times. But I figure it's a slow-growing cancer, and why are you going to go to these extreme measures with a person in which case he was already 87 years old? So I said, "Oh, listen, don't mess with him. He's not complaining of pain, so leave him alone." And he lived to be 93. So I always said that he wouldn't have lived that long if I let them do all of that stuff they wanted to do to him.
Exactly. Now, I met there's a gentleman named Ronald Wheeler who lives in Florida, who I found out through a friend of mine in Las Vegas who does alternative medicine. Ronald Wheeler is a urologist who did a lot of prostate cancers. And he decided he was tired of taking men's prostates out and creating all the kind of problems that men have from that surgery. And he did some research and found that really there's only 3 things that happen to the prostate. It either becomes enlarged, infected, or cancer. So he looked at what things would help the prostate, which we're not usually taught about. And he put together a program, a product he called Peanuts. Peanuts is an acronym, spelled Peenuts. That stands for power to eliminate every time, never urinate too soon. So he started to use that product to control men's prostates, because his philosophy was that whatever's in the prostate, as long as it stays in the prostate, it's not going to cause you any serious damage. So he would give people large doses of peanuts, and now the government made him change the name. That's the other thing I learned. If you find something that's really effective, you're going to get in trouble with the government. And that's a very simple explanation, because the government basically is funded by the drug companies, and the drug companies don't want competition. And since they control medical education, they teach doctors how to be sophisticated drug dealers and surgery prescribers. And the reason why surgery is so popular is because when you get surgery, you're going to need more drugs. You're going to need anesthesia. You're going to need antibiotics. You're going to need steroids. So, it's a drug funding program. So, anyway, the government jumped on Ronald Wheeler, made him change the name. He changed the name to Prostate PT. But the prostate product is still available for people. But even more so than that, another person you're going to hear about in my book is a man named Bernardo Mahalka. Bernardo I met in Dallas in 1992 at a conference, an alternative medicine conference. It was an organization it's still existing, called American College for Advancement in Medicine. It's a group of doctors from all over the world who do alternative therapies. So I went to the meeting, and he introduced me to Linus Pauling. You probably know Linus Pauling.
I'm familiar with him, yes, okay. With vitamin C.
Okay, exactly. Well, what most people don't know is Linus Pauling is the only man to win the Nobel Peace Prize twice by himself. Anyway, Bernardo was a very interesting fellow. He was a naturopath out of Mexico, and he had an alternative clinic for cancer. So I told him I was interested in his work, and he asked me to come down to visit him, and I did in 1994. But interesting, in 2005, he called me and he said, Fred, I found something where all my cancer patients get better. I said, what are you doing? He said, well, I found a book called The Hidden Story of Cancer by Brian Peskin. And Brian Peskin is the engineer who is from MIT. He's not a doctor, not a medical professional, but he's an analytical guy. And he had never heard of Otto Warburg. Now, I don't know have you ever heard of the term or the name Otto Warburg?
No, I'm not familiar with it.
Okay. I heard his name mentioned once when I was in medical school, so I did remember that. But Otto Warburg was a MD PhD out of Germany who figured out what cancer was and got the Nobel Peace Prize for it in 1931. So he put together a research project to find out what Otto Warburg did, and he started to produce the products that would do what Otto Warburg said, and he started to see dramatic improvement in cancer patients. Now, what Otto did was he found that the cell membrane, which is a highly intricate, complicated structure. Most people don't think about membranes, but we're 80 to 100 trillion cells in the average adult human, and most of those cells are covered with membranes, and the membranes are what are responsible for pulling oxygen into the cell. Now, we all breathe. We know you got to breathe. But when you breathe in oxygen. What happens to the oxygen? The oxygen has to go into the lungs, and then it has to be transferred to the red blood cells. The red blood cells carry the oxygen from the lungs to the tissues so that every cell in the body that needs oxygen can get it. But how does it get into the cell? It gets into the cell because the cell membrane, if it's constructed properly, has the ability to pull oxygen like a magnet pulls a piece of metal. And once the oxygen is in the cell, it can be used in the metabolism project, where you burn sugars and fats to make energy. You know, all of us know about an experiment where you take a candle and put a glass over the lit candle, and eventually the flame goes out because the oxygen is used up. So oxygen is absolutely necessary. So as long as oxygen is getting into the cell, everything's hunky-dory, no problem. But if for some reason the cell membrane doesn't have the ability to pull oxygen, which it will not if it doesn't get the proper quality and quantity of essential fats and minerals, then the cell will have to go to plan B to generate energy, which will not produce the quality of energy that it would with oxygen, but it will still continue to live for a while. It's a backup plan. I tell people to think about the World Trade Center. When the planes hit the World Trade Center, it was a terrible thing. But then you saw people jumping out of the building, and you had to say to yourself, how bad must things have been in that building to make jumping out of a high tower, a skyscraper, an option? Well, that's what the cell goes through when it doesn't get oxygen. And the Simoncini, a doctor in Italy, described, he calls it a fungus-type reaction, making energy without oxygen. So what the cell does is it reverts to plan B, and plan B is cancer. So what Otto Warburg did was, or Brian Peskin did, was figure out a way to supply large quantities of essential fats and minerals to the person so that they would have the raw materials to build healthy cell membranes so that they could have healthy cells to replace the sick and dying cells. You do know all cells have an expiration date. No cell lives
Yes.
forever. So the cancer cells have an expiration date too. So the key is don't let them be replaced by more cancer cells. Have them be replaced by healthy cells. And that started to make sense because, Olivia Newton-John had cancer 4 times. You know that?
Did not know that.
She had cancer 4 times before she died. Now, the question is, why did she getting cancer? The medical community's philosophy is we'll kill the cancer. Sounds good, but what keeps you from getting it again? Stop making cancer. You make cancer. In fact, in 1900, 124 years ago, if you looked at the top 10 things that killed Americans, cancer wasn't in the top 10.
That's true.
It's now number 2. What happened in the last 124 years? We changed the food. So now the essential fats and minerals, which are essential part of the cell membrane, which gives it the ability to pull oxygen, is being adulterated by the food industry because essential fats and minerals cause foods to spoil, which shortens the shelf life. So, in order to increase the shelf life, you get rid of the essential fats and minerals. Unfortunately, over the last 124 years, we've been eating increasing amounts of foods that don't have essential fats and minerals. Consequently, cancer is on the rise, regardless of how many billions of dollars we put into cancer research.
That's interesting that you talk about that because, that's an area that I have, studied. In fact, I was the chairman of the National Black Leadership Initiative on Cancer. And, cancer is not anything unusual. We get cancer all of the time. In fact, you've
Right.
got millions and billions of cells dividing, and it's inevitable that some of the cells will be aberrant and will go outside of the natural controls. But our immune system is such that when those cancers occur, we're usually able to catch that cancer and kill it and get rid of it, and it doesn't cause us any problems. I mean, cancer is not unusual. We get cancer all the time. But like you say, the problem is,
Exactly.
why is it out of control and why is it metastasizing and growing at a rate faster than the other cells around it? So I understand exactly what you're talking about. And if there is a way to control, the growth and the spread of the cancer, then the natural cells will just take over. There are more of them to begin with, and then the cancer won't be a problem. So I agree with you on that theory.
I have a lady who I've been treating. She came to me in the early 90s with colon cancer. I said, please get the colon cancer removed since it's an easy fix to go ahead and get rid of the cancer. Now, once you get the cancer removed, no more treatment from the hospital. Get your tail in here and let's get started on the program. That she get no chemo, no radiation. She'll be 100 next month.
That's an interesting story. That's a great antidote.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. So, this is interesting. So, where can people find out more information about this alternative medicine? I mean, are there, sources that you would recommend people to go to, or, where could they find out more information about this? Because this is not available in the mainstream.
No, it's not. That's why I wrote the book, to give people an idea of the types of things you're going to need to understand, because we live in a very interesting system. It's dominated by capitalism and white supremacy, but you can't do much about either one of those. They're going to be here, but you can educate yourself and try to neutralize some of the adverse effects you get from those systems. And that's why I wrote the book. There's a famous artist I fell in love with many years ago named Taj Mahal. And Taj Mahal has a song he sings called "You're Gonna Need Somebody on Your Bond." Late at night when the devil comes to creep in the room, you're gonna need somebody on your bond. And that's why I wrote the book, because you're gonna need some information to help you get through this system. And if you understand about parasites, you understand about hormones, you understand about food, because that's the other thing I didn't touch on. I told people the person who should get the Nobel Peace Prize for nutrition is Stephen Gundry. Now I'm sure you heard the name Gundry.
Yes, I have.
Yeah, well, you hear so many people talking about food, you kind of dismiss people, But I've been since that day with Charles in 1972, and he introduced me to the concept of nutrition. I've been looking for who has the best diet for human beings on planet Earth. And I've looked at everybody from Dick Gregory to Pritikin to macrobiotics. I've looked at all of them. Gundry has the best program to help more people with more problems than anything I've ever seen. And it basically is the concept is that your bowel has both good and bad bacteria. Most people can agree
Yes.
with that. Okay. The concept is keep the good bacteria happy and don't take care of the bad bacteria. Now, how do you take care of the bad bacteria? We do that inadvertently by eating foods that are loaded with bad bacteria food, and that's lectins. And where lectins? Lectins are proteins made by certain plants in order to poison the animals that eat them. Now, what plants are high in lectins? Grains, pseudograins, nightshades, and legumes. Now, if you look at the Western diet, it's loaded with foods that produce lectins. The most famous one being gluten. Most people
Hmm.
know somebody or
A
heard
lot
of
of people are
somebody having
allergic to
gluten
that.
sensitivity. Exactly. Well, they're allergic to it because gluten is a lectin and it's a poison. So uh, people feel that if well, I don't have a problem with eating wheat, so I'm okay. Well, uh, not so quick. The bottom line is you have to reduce your dosage of lectins. I tell people nobody's going to be perfect because this is a Western culture. We eat lectins big time, but you need to be aware of what foods are high in lectins and try to reduce them or neutralize them as best you can. And one of the best ways to neutralize them is through pressure cooking. People like beans loaded with lectin, the legumes, pressure cook them. Um, People like rice. I tell them eat Indian style basmati white, pressure cook it,
Hmm.
destroy those lectins. So the idea is to dramatically reduce your level of lectin intake. Treat yourself for parasites because the two most common things that mess up your bowel are parasites and lectins. And if you can normalize a person's bowel function, you can improve almost anything that's going on with them. So that's the key to understanding how this concept works.
You know, Dr. Burton, it's so interesting. I do a lot of the things that you're telling me about now, and now I'm starting to get an understanding of them. One of the things that I did was I travel a lot. So I go to Africa,
Yeah,
I go everywhere. And everybody usually gets sick. They have Montezuma's revenge, diarrhea, all of that kind of stuff. And I have never had any of that. And what I did was I use a simple theory based on putting good bacteria in your system. Because if
yeah,
you fill up,
probiotics.
yes, if you fill up your system with good bacteria, then there's no room for the bacteria to grow. It's a
That's
basic
an interesting
principle.
concept.
So what I would
Yeah,
do is I would take large quantities of acidophilus lactose bacillus before I went on
right.
my trips. I take huge quantities of it. Then, if I
Okay.
ate anything, there's no room for it to grow. It was a basic principle. And I've never been sick. I've never had a
Interesting.
cold. I've never had a virus. I don't have high blood pressure. I don't have diabetes, none of that stuff. And I'm 70 years old. So there must be some
Okay.
truth in doing those practices.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt that there are many ways to address your bowel, but you got to address your bowel. And what you're doing is you're loading up, like you said, with probiotics, which is bacteria that's healthy and good bacteria. Another thing to do is eating things that are prebiotic, meaning they're feeding your good bacteria. That's one of the reasons why I like a lot of cabbage, particularly sauerkraut,
Yes.
because it's a great, good prebiotic food. So, the main thing is just understanding the basic principles of living on this planet. Because, I've looked into a doctor named D'Amato who wrote a book called Eat Right for Your Type. You may have heard about it. And he talks about the fact that uh, certain blood types do better with certain types of foods. Well, I found that a little too cumbersome. And if you look at what Gundry is saying, he incorporates those principles. And if you get rid of the lectins, you'll address all of the points that the motto is trying to make. So uh, the prebiotics feed the good bacteria. The probiotics are the good bacteria. Parasites can exist. How you made it in and out of Africa without getting parasites, that's an interesting concept. Because I tell all of my patients, if you're traveling anywhere, especially to Africa, you need to start deworming the day you
I may
leave and
have some,
continue once
so
you're
I'm
away.
going to get your
Yeah,
formula and take it. Well,
yeah,
it's really
yeah.
interesting because I had H. pylori. And I'll never forget it. I
That,
did had no idea that I had H. pylori. And what happened is
okay,
I went to a medical convention and he had a machine. So I said, "Oh, let me
yeah,
blow in the machine and just test it." And then when I went back, they said, "Oh, you got to go over here and talk to the guy." And the guy told me that I had H. pylori. I had no idea that I have it. And as you know, it's one of the leading causes of ulcers and all of that stuff. So, fortunately, I was able to write out the medical regimen, for the antibiotics and got rid of it. So you may be
yeah,
right. I probably have
yeah.
parasites and just don't know it.
Well, let me tell you, I had anybody who's come to me with a diagnosis of H. pylori, I treat them for worms, they get better.
Hmm. That's right.
So
Yeah.
bottom line, and it's just interesting. I've never had a problem with H. pylori, even though even before that New Zealand physician came up with the idea that H. pylori was the cause of gastric ulcers by giving himself uh, H. pylori, which I thought was quite brave of him as a scientist. Uh, when I heard about that, I said, "Well, just treat yourself with parasites, you'll be fine. Don't worry about it." Because I'm
Uh,
telling you, this is their planet. They're in everything. And you
That's
know, I, I
interesting.
used I used to have an office in Germantown. I was at one corner, and the other corner was Dr. Walls, who has passed on now. He's a veterinarian, and we got to know each other. And I said to him once, I said, you know, we're the only person in the neighborhood to deworm all our patients because he dewormed all his dogs.
That's interesting. Well, I understand it. So, the model that we practice in medicine is a model of curing disease. So we,
Right.
as a medical doctor, you don't even interface with somebody unless there's something wrong with them. And I always
Oh,
thought that
exactly.
that was something wrong with that because I think that you should work with people who are well and keep them from getting sick, not the other way around.
Yeah, but you're right. But the orientation we learned in medical school is to treat disease. You
That's
know, and
right.
if, in fact, I remember years ago when I first started practicing, when a person came with a form to be filled out and they said diagnosis, I'd put, well, no, they're healthy. You know, and there's no place for that. They got to have a disease. In order for the insurance company to consider payment, they
That's
wouldn't
right.
even, they had to have a disease. There's one other thing before time gets away from us, I wanted to make sure you were aware of. It's something I learned from a doctor in 1987, a doctor named T. McPherson Brown. Now, T. McPherson Brown was a graduate of Swarthmore College, Johns Hopkins University Medical School. He was the chairman of internal medicine at George Washington University for 20 years. For those of you who don't know, George Washington University Hospital is right down the street from the White House. That's where they took Reagan when he got shot by Hinken years ago. Anyway, he realized that what we call autoimmune diseases are in fact infections. Okay. And he treated them quite successfully using antibiotics. Now, you would think with his credentials, he would have been invited to speak at all of the major universities and conferences. And he told me they wouldn't let him speak. And I said to him, I said, wait a minute. Now, you're a good white man. You've been to all these hospitals and institutions. You got all these credentials and letters, and they won't let you speak. He said, they won't let me speak. I thought that was quite interesting. So I realized early on that if he don't qualify, I'm in trouble.
So listen, our time is starting to run out. We've been talking,
Yeah.
and this has been such an interesting conversation. I definitely want you to come back again. We're going to do a part 2 on this one because we got some other areas that we want to call. But I just want you to get the information out to the people about your book once again, so that we can know about
Yeah.
where we can do and how people can get in touch with you and call you, for these treatments. I'd be interested in
Yeah.
coming to you for that deworming treatment myself. So go
Yeah.
ahead, give us that
Well,
information
okay.
once again.
Sure. The phone number from my office is 610-649-4325. 610-649-4325. The book can be gotten on Amazon and at that number. You can make an appointment at that number. We do telephone consults, and I also have a website, burtonmedicalcenter.com. You can get all the information through that website. So I'm available, and we look forward to seeing new people because what I love about my practice is once I treat a person and they get on track and know what to do, I tell them, go send me somebody else. I don't need to see you all the time. Send me somebody else.
Okay, so thank you so much, Dr. Burton. This has been a most insightful interview. I love it, and I'm going to go and do some of these things myself. So thanks once
I,
again.
I appreciate you. Thank you very much.
All right,
Take care.
goodbye.
Doc,
That was a good one. That was a good one.
that was
That's a
awesome.
good one. That was a good one.
Awesome. And your insight there really added to his.
great.
Because what we want to do is use your insight to build up the guest,
Right,
as
right.
opposed to you dominating and the guest filling in. Do you understand?
But he's so much knowledgeable than me.
Well,
He know a lot more about that than I do.
You're right. He's very knowledgeable.
Yeah.
I'm listening to him making notes. Because you nuts. I had to take those things.
Okay.
I couldn't find them anymore.
Oh, he know all about that. Well, I talk with him. He's my good friend. He specializes in the Amish people
Okay, right.
that don't believe in taking any medicine. He got a whole group of
I
them.
got the book on the Amazon.
Yes.
Yeah, but I got to get his book. I'm going to get his book.
Well, not only that, but I'm going to go to him for that worm therapy because he's probably right.
He is probably right. And also, he was talking about gluten and everything. I'm like, I don't really have
Well, no, I have gluten. I know I have a gluten allergy. I already know that.
But what he said very, 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 and I think about my life compared to my siblings. I took red meat out of my diet over 50
Right.
years ago.
That's right.
I don't eat a lot of beans, but I do eat beans.
I pressure cook my beans.
And that's
I've
what he
always
said.
been pressure cooking them for
cook the
years.
bean,
Yep.
And they're still nutritious.
Yeah, so I make what they call chili,
Right.
and I put it in a pressure cooker,
Uh-huh.
and I cook it on a real low heat for a long time in the pressure
Right,
cooker.
right.
That's how I cook my beans. Everybody loves them. They say,
know.
"Oh, this is the best chili I ever had."
Yeah.
And I don't make it with canned beans. I make it from hard beans, and I soak them. And you know what I do? I soak them in beer or baking soda, and that takes the gas out of them.
Right, and that's what you want.
Yeah.
And he was talking about the same thing with rice.
Yes.
You know, how do you get the...
I use that basmati rice,
Yeah.
and I cook it in a pressure cooker.
There you go. Okay.
Yep, sure do. Yeah, so that was a good one.